There was a time when privacy violations were universally condemned, when reading someone's private messages was understood to be a breach of trust regardless of what those messages might reveal, and when people understood that discovering betrayal through invasion of privacy complicated the moral clarity of the situation. But what happened to Marcus and Valerie Thompson on Steve Harvey's show would prove that sometimes the way we discover truth matters almost as much as the truth itself, and that public humiliation can destroy any chance of genuine resolution even when the underlying grievance is completely justified. When this couple appeared on stage together and Valerie revealed that she had not only read Marcus's private messages without permission, but had then shared them publicly on social media before bringing the issue to national television, Steve Harvey delivered a response that shocked both of them by addressing not just Marcus's betrayal, but Valerie's violation of his privacy and her weaponization of his mistakes. What happened next showed millions of viewers that two wrongs do not make a right, that how you respond to betrayal reveals as much about your character as the betrayal itself, and that seeking public revenge rather than private resolution often destroys any possibility of healing or moving forward with dignity. If you believe that discovering wrongdoing does not give you unlimited license to violate privacy and seek public humiliation, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What you are about to witness is a couple learning the hard way that the method you choose to address betrayal can be just as destructive as the betrayal itself. Marcus and Valerie Thompson had been married for 11 years and lived in Atlanta, Georgia, where Marcus worked as an account executive for a software company and Valerie managed operations for a nonprofit organization serving underserved youth. They had 2 children, a 9-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son, and by most external measures appeared to have a stable middle-class family life built on shared values and mutual commitment. But beneath the surface of their marriage, trust issues and communication breakdowns had been festering for years, creating the conditions for the explosive confrontation that would eventually play out on national television. Valerie had grown up in a household marked by infidelity, watching her father carry on multiple affairs throughout her childhood while her mother either did not know or pretended not to know. When Valerie was 15, her mother finally discovered evidence of one of her father's affairs, and the ensuing confrontation had torn their family apart in spectacular fashion. Her mother had called family members, shared details with friends, and made sure everyone in their community knew exactly what her father had done. The public humiliation had been devastating for everyone involved, and young Valerie had watched her family implode not just from the affair but from the scorched earth approach her mother had taken to exposing it. Despite witnessing this destruction, or perhaps because of it, Valerie had developed an intense fear of being betrayed the way her mother had been. When she married Marcus at 26, she had been hypervigilant about signs of infidelity, sometimes accusing him of cheating based on minor inconsistencies in his schedule or his failure to respond to her texts immediately. Marcus had found her suspicion frustrating, but had attributed it to her difficult childhood, and tried to be understanding and patient. For the first 8 years of their marriage, Marcus had given Valerie no real reason to doubt his faithfulness. He worked long hours but was transparent about his schedule. He included Valerie in work social events. He was affectionate and attentive at home. But in the past 3 years, as work stress had increased and their physical intimacy had declined due to the demands of raising young children and managing busy careers, Marcus had begun to feel emotionally disconnected from Valerie. Instead of addressing this directly with her, he had begun seeking validation and connection elsewhere. The elsewhere in question was not a physical affair, but rather inappropriate online relationships with women he met through social media and professional networking sites. Marcus had begun engaging in flirtatious conversations through direct messages, sharing complaints about his marriage, discussing his attraction to these women, and maintaining ongoing exchanges that crossed clear boundaries, even though they never progressed to in-person meetings or physical contact. He told himself these were harmless conversations, that everyone complained about their spouse sometimes, that he was not actually cheating because nothing physical was happening. Valerie had noticed Marcus becoming more protective of his phone, taking it everywhere including to the bathroom, angling the screen away from her when he used it, and receiving messages at odd hours that he would check immediately but would not discuss. Her childhood trauma around infidelity had made her hyper-aware of these signs, and her suspicion had grown steadily over several months. She had confronted Marcus repeatedly, asking directly if he was talking to other women, if something was going on that she should know about, if their marriage was in trouble. Marcus had dismissed her concerns each time, claiming she was being paranoid and that her jealousy was pushing him away. The gaslighting had been effective for a time. Valerie had begun to question whether her suspicions were indeed the product of her childhood trauma, rather than accurate perceptions of actual problems. But the nagging feeling that something was wrong would not go away, and eventually Valerie made a decision that would have profound consequences for their marriage and for both of their reputations. One evening when Marcus was in the shower, Valerie picked up his phone and used his thumbprint to unlock it while he was unconscious, a trick she had learned was possible. She went straight to his direct messages on Instagram and found exactly what she had suspected but hoped she would not find. Months of conversations with multiple women, messages that ranged from mildly flirtatious to explicitly sexual, complaints about Valerie being cold and unaffectionate, discussions of what Marcus would like to do with these women if circumstances were different, and ongoing exchanges that demonstrated sustained emotional and sexual interest in people who were not his wife. Valerie sat on their bed reading through message after message, her hands shaking and her heart pounding. The betrayal was not what she had imagined when she had feared Marcus was cheating. There was no evidence of physical affairs, no hotel rooms or secret meetings. But the emotional betrayal felt just as devastating. Marcus had been sharing intimate thoughts with other women, seeking connection and validation from them, complaining about Valerie behind her back, and maintaining relationships that he had explicitly hidden from her while gaslighting her into thinking she was imagining problems. In that moment, sitting with Marcus's phone in her hands and the evidence of his betrayal scrolling across the screen, Valerie made a series of decisions that she would later struggle to justify, but which felt righteous and necessary in the heat of her anger and hurt. She took screenshots of the most damning messages. She sent them to her own phone, and then, in a decision that would fundamentally change the trajectory of their marriage crisis, she posted several of the messages to her Instagram story, with Marcus tagged, along with commentary about what kind of man sends these messages to other women while his wife is home taking care of their children. Within hours, the posts had been seen by hundreds of their mutual friends, family members, colleagues, and acquaintances. Valerie's phone exploded with messages from people expressing shock, offering support, or asking for details about what was happening. Marcus's phone also exploded with messages, though his were a mixture of people asking if the posts were real, people defending Valerie, and people criticizing her for handling the situation publicly. Their families became involved immediately, with both sides taking positions and making the private crisis a family-wide conflict. When Marcus emerged from the shower and saw what Valerie had done, his initial response was not remorse about the messages themselves but fury about the invasion of his privacy and the public humiliation. He accused Valerie of violating his privacy, damaging his professional reputation, and turning their private issues into public entertainment. Valerie countered that he had forfeited any right to privacy when he started sending inappropriate messages to other women, that she had every right to expose his behavior, and that if he was ashamed of people seeing the messages, perhaps he should not have sent them in the first place. The argument that followed was one of the worst of their marriage. Marcus claimed that Valerie's public posting proved she cared more about revenge than about their marriage or their children. Valerie claimed that Marcus's messages proved he had never respected their marriage anyway, and that she was done protecting a man who had betrayed and gaslighted her. They both said things they could not take back, accusations and insults that would echo in their relationship for years regardless of whether the marriage survived. In the days following the Instagram incident, Valerie did not take down the posts despite Marcus's demands that she do so. She felt justified in leaving them up, believing that people should know what kind of person Marcus was behind the facade of devoted husband and father. Marcus moved into their guest room, unable to share a bed with someone who had humiliated him so publicly, while refusing to acknowledge that her response had been inappropriate regardless of what he had done. Their families became more involved, with Valerie's mother fully supporting the public exposure based on her own experience with infidelity, while Marcus's family argued that Valerie had gone too far and that private matters should remain private. Friends took sides, some supporting Valerie's right to expose betrayal and others arguing that she had damaged Marcus's reputation in ways that went beyond what his messages deserved. The couple found themselves at the center of ongoing public discussion and judgment, with their marriage crisis becoming community entertainment rather than a private matter to be worked through. 3 weeks after the Instagram incident, a friend of Valerie's who worked in television suggested that they appear on Steve Harvey's show to address the situation publicly and get advice about how to move forward. Valerie was immediately interested, seeing it as an opportunity to have her hurt validated and to have Steve condemn Marcus's behavior in front of a national audience. Marcus was initially resistant, feeling that they had already had too much public involvement in their private crisis, but Valerie issued an ultimatum. Either he would appear on the show with her, or she would go alone and tell her side of the story without his input. Faced with the possibility of being portrayed as the villain in a national narrative he could not control, Marcus reluctantly agreed to participate. The weeks between agreeing to appear on Steve Harvey's show and the actual taping were marked by escalating hostility between Marcus and Valerie. They were living in the same house, but barely speaking except to coordinate childcare and household logistics. The Instagram posts remained up, continuing to generate comments and reactions from their extended network. Both Marcus and Valerie were preparing their cases for the show, each convinced that Steve would validate their perspective and condemn the other's behavior. Valerie had been collecting additional evidence of Marcus's inappropriate messages, going back through his phone whenever she could access it and finding more examples to strengthen her case. She had compiled screenshots documenting months of flirtatious and sexual conversations with at least 5 different women. She planned to present this evidence on the show, believing that the volume and consistency of the messages would make clear that Marcus was a serial emotional cheater who had been gaslighting her while maintaining inappropriate relationships behind her back. Marcus, for his part, had been documenting Valerie's invasion of his privacy and her pattern of public humiliation. He had screenshots of her Instagram posts, records of the comments and reactions they had generated, and messages from colleagues expressing concern about how the public posting had affected his professional reputation. He planned to argue that while his messages were inappropriate, Valerie's response had been far more damaging and had destroyed any possibility of working through their issues privately and constructively. Neither of them had seriously considered marriage counseling or private mediation. Both were more invested in being proven right than in finding a path to reconciliation. The show appearance had become not an opportunity for healing, but a continuation of their conflict in an even more public arena. Their children, meanwhile, were suffering from the ongoing tension and the public nature of their parents' conflict. Classmates had seen or heard about the Instagram posts, and both children had faced questions and teasing at school about whether their father had a girlfriend. Valerie and Marcus were so consumed with their conflict with each other that they had not adequately protected their children from the fallout of their very public marriage crisis. The night before their appearance on the show, Valerie and Marcus barely slept. Each was rehearsing what they would say, imagining how Steve would react to their evidence, and preparing to defend their actions against the other's accusations. Neither was prepared for the possibility that Steve might condemn both of their behaviors rather than taking a clear side in their conflict. Walking onto the Steve Harvey stage together, Marcus and Valerie embodied physical tension and barely contained hostility. They sat in separate chairs rather than next to each other, their body language communicating the depth of their estrangement. Steve greeted them and invited them to explain what had brought them to his show. Valerie spoke first, her voice tight with anger, as she described finding the inappropriate messages on Marcus's phone and her decision to post them publicly. She pulled out her phone and offered to show Steve some of the messages, clearly expecting him to be shocked and appalled by Marcus's behavior. But before Steve could respond, Marcus jumped in to defend himself, arguing that Valerie had violated his privacy, damaged his reputation, and turned their private issues into public spectacle. What followed was several minutes of both Marcus and Valerie talking over each other, each trying to make their case, each certain they were the wronged party. Steve let them go for a bit before finally raising his hand to stop them. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried undeniable authority. Both of you need to stop talking for a minute and listen to me, because what I am about to say is going to be hard for both of you to hear. The studio went quiet. Valerie looked confident, certain Steve was about to condemn Marcus. Marcus looked defensive, preparing for the public scolding he expected. What Steve said next surprised them both. Marcus, the messages you sent to these women were inappropriate and disrespectful to your wife and your marriage. You were seeking emotional and sexual validation from other women while your wife was home taking care of your children. You were complaining about your marriage to people outside your marriage instead of addressing your concerns directly with your wife. And when she confronted you based on her accurate instincts that something was wrong, you gaslighted her and made her feel like she was being paranoid. All of that is wrong, and you need to own it fully without excuses. Marcus nodded, looking somewhat relieved that Steve's assessment matched what he had expected. But Steve was not finished. But Valerie, Steve continued, turning his attention to her, and his voice took on an edge that made clear he was not pleased with her either. What you did in response to finding those messages was also wrong, and I need you to understand why, because I do not think you do. Valerie's confident expression faltered. Steve continued with growing intensity. You violated your husband's privacy by going through his phone without permission. Now, I know what you are going to say. You are going to say that you had a right to know what he was doing, that your suspicions justified checking his phone, that discovering betrayal means the privacy violation was warranted. But Valerie, that is not how it works. Two wrongs do not make a right. His inappropriate messages do not give you unlimited license to invade his privacy. The audience stirred uncomfortably, not sure whether to agree with this assessment. Steve pressed forward. But worse than invading his privacy was what you did next. You took private messages, as inappropriate as they were, and you posted them publicly on social media. You tagged your husband so everyone could see. You added your own commentary. You turned his mistakes into public entertainment. You weaponized his betrayal to humiliate him in front of everyone he knows. And then you left those posts up for weeks, continuing the public humiliation long after you had made your point. Valerie tried to interrupt, but Steve held up his hand. I know you felt justified. I know you were hurt and angry and wanted him to face consequences. But Valerie, what you did went way beyond holding him accountable. You tried to destroy his reputation. You damaged his professional standing. You made your private marriage crisis into public spectacle. And worst of all, you did all of this without thinking about how it would affect your children. Valerie's eyes filled with tears, but Steve did not soften his message. Your children's friends saw those posts or heard about them. Your children faced questions at school about whether their father was cheating. You put your need for revenge ahead of your children's need to be protected from the details of their parents' marriage problems. That is not acceptable regardless of what Marcus did. Steve turned back to address both of them. Here is what both of you need to understand. You are both wrong. Marcus, you betrayed your wife's trust and gaslighted her when she questioned you about it. Valerie, you violated his privacy and then weaponized what you found to publicly humiliate him. Neither of you has moral high ground here. Neither of you gets to claim victim status while ignoring your own destructive behavior. The studio remained silent as Steve continued. The messages Marcus sent were wrong, but they were private messages that should have remained between you and him to address in counseling or through whatever process you chose for dealing with the betrayal. By making them public, You lost any possibility of working through this constructively. You turned your marriage into a public spectacle where everyone has opinions and takes sides, and both of you are performing for an audience instead of actually dealing with your issues. Steve's voice grew even more intense. And now you have come here, to national television, to continue that public performance. Valerie, you are not here to get advice about your marriage. You are here to have me validate your anger and condemn Marcus in front of millions of people. You want me to co-sign your public humiliation of your husband. Marcus, you are here because you feel like you have to defend yourself against being portrayed as the villain, not because you genuinely want to repair your marriage. He paused before delivering his final assessment. Neither of you is actually interested in healing or reconciliation. You are both too invested in being right and making the other person wrong. You have both chosen public battle over private resolution, and your children are the ones who are really suffering from both of your choices. The impact of Steve's words on both Marcus and Valerie was visible. Neither had expected to be held accountable for their own behavior. Both had come expecting Steve to validate their position and condemn their spouse. Instead, they were forced to confront that their conflict had become toxic and destructive in ways that went beyond the original betrayal. Steve's advice came with uncompromising clarity. Here is what you need to do if you have any hope of saving your marriage. First, Valerie, you need to take down those Instagram posts immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week. As soon as you leave this stage, you have made your point. Continuing to keep them up is just ongoing revenge, and it is destroying any chance you have at reconciliation. He turned to Marcus. Second, Marcus, you need to own fully what you did without trying to deflect to Valerie's response. Yes, she violated your privacy. Yes, she posted things publicly that should have remained private, but none of that changes the fact that you betrayed her trust and gaslighted her about it. You do not get to use her bad behavior as an excuse to avoid accountability for your own. Steve addressed both of them together. Third, you both need to get into intensive marriage counseling immediately with a therapist who will hold both of you accountable for your roles in this disaster. Not a friend, not a pastor who will take sides, not social media, not me. A professional who can help you work through the betrayal, the privacy violation, and the damage you have both done to your marriage and your family. His final words carried particular weight. And fourth, you need to make a choice together about whether you actually want to save this marriage or whether you are just prolonging the inevitable. Because right now, you are both more interested in winning this battle than in rebuilding trust, and you cannot have both. Either you commit to doing the hard work of healing privately and stop performing your conflict for public consumption, or you acknowledge that this marriage is over and figure out how to co-parent without destroying each other in the process. ACT 5VT Lacey Y 1620 Plea Minutes. The silence in the studio after Steve finished speaking was profound. Neither Marcus nor Valerie had expected to be held equally accountable. Both had tears streaming down their faces, though it was unclear whether those tears represented remorse, anger, or simply the shock of having their behavior condemned so directly. When they left the stage, they did not speak to each other. But on the drive home, something shifted. Whether it was embarrassment at having been called out so publicly or genuine recognition of their mutual destructiveness, both Marcus and Valerie seemed to understand that their approach to their marriage crisis had been making everything worse. That evening, Valerie took down the Instagram posts as Steve had directed. Marcus acknowledged that while he felt violated by her actions, his inappropriate messages had created the conditions for the crisis. They agreed to find a marriage counselor and to stop involving other people in their private issues. The therapy that followed was difficult and painful. Both had to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their marriage. Marcus had to acknowledge that his emotional affairs, even if not physical, had been genuine betrayals of trust and that his gaslighting had compounded the harm. Valerie had to acknowledge that her response to discovering the betrayal had been disproportionate and destructive, motivated more by desire for revenge than by desire for resolution. Their therapist helped them understand that they had both been reacting from trauma rather than responding thoughtfully to their situation. Marcus's messages had been attempts to feel valued and desired without doing the hard work of addressing his disconnection from Valerie directly. Valerie's public posting had been an attempt to avoid feeling powerless the way her mother had been, but in doing so, she had repeated her mother's scorched earth approach that had destroyed her family. 2 months after their appearance on Steve Harvey's show, the producers reached out about a follow-up segment. Marcus and Valerie agreed, wanting to share what they had learned about the destructive nature of public battles over private issues. When they returned to the stage, the change was visible. They sat next to each other rather than in separate chairs. They held hands. They spoke with a humility and self-awareness that had not been present during their first appearance. Steve asked them what had changed. Valerie spoke first, her voice quiet but clear. "I want to apologize to Marcus and to everyone watching for what I did. I violated his privacy and weaponized what I found to humiliate him publicly. I told myself I was holding him accountable, but really I was seeking revenge. I was more interested in making him hurt the way I was hurting than in actually dealing with our marriage problems constructively. I damaged his reputation, I hurt our children, and I made our private crisis into public entertainment. That was wrong regardless of what he did." Marcus spoke next, "And I want to acknowledge that my messages to other women were betrayals of our marriage. I was seeking validation and connection from people outside our relationship instead of addressing my feelings with Valerie directly. When she confronted me based on her accurate instincts, I gaslighted her and made her feel like she was imagining problems. I created the conditions for this crisis through my own choices, and I have to own that completely." Steve nodded with obvious satisfaction. "This is what I wanted to see. Both of you taking responsibility for your own behavior instead of focusing on what the other person did wrong. How is your marriage doing now?" The couple looked at each other before Valerie answered. "We are working on it. We are in intensive counseling. We have a long way to go to rebuild trust, but we are both committed to doing the work privately without social media, without involving everyone else in our business. We learned the hard way that public battles destroy any chance of private healing." Over the following year, Marcus and Valerie's transformation continued. The therapy helped them address not just the immediate crisis but deeper patterns of poor communication and unmet needs that had created vulnerability to the kinds of betrayals that had nearly destroyed their marriage. They established clear boundaries about privacy, transparency, and appropriate behavior both online and offline. They learned to address conflicts directly with each other rather than seeking validation or revenge through public forums. Most importantly, they worked to repair the damage their public conflict had done to their children. Both apologized to their kids for not protecting them from the details of adult problems and for allowing their marriage crisis to become something their children faced questions about at school. They established that going forward, their family's private matters would remain private. 3 years after their explosive first appearance on Steve Harvey's show, Marcus and Valerie were invited back for a final update. They returned as advocates for handling marriage crises privately and constructively rather than weaponizing betrayal through public humiliation. During that final appearance, Steve asked them what they would tell other couples facing similar situations of discovered betrayal and the temptation to expose it publicly. Marcus and Valerie, speaking as a united voice, offered wisdom earned through painful experience. "We would tell them that discovering betrayal does not give you the right to violate privacy and seek public revenge. We would tell them that 2 wrongs do not make a right. We would tell them that making your private issues public destroys any chance of working through them constructively. We would tell them that your children should never have to defend their family against public knowledge of their parents' mistakes. And we would tell them that the way you respond to betrayal reveals as much about your character as the betrayal itself." They continued with growing conviction. Marcus's messages were wrong, absolutely wrong, but posting them publicly did not make them right. It just added another layer of damage to an already damaged situation. "We both had to learn that you cannot heal in public what you destroyed in private. You have to choose whether you want revenge or resolution, because you cannot have both. Steve addressed the audience with final thoughts that would be widely shared and discussed in the days that followed. This is my message to everyone watching. When you discover your partner has betrayed you, you have every right to be angry, hurt, and devastated, but you do not have the right to violate their privacy and weaponize what you find to destroy them publicly. That is not justice. That is revenge, and revenge does not heal you or your relationship. It just makes you someone who also behaved badly. He continued with particular emphasis. If you want to end your relationship after discovering betrayal, that is your right. If you want to work through it in counseling, that is also your right. But what is never okay is turning your private pain into public entertainment, making your partner's mistakes available for everyone to judge, and involving your entire social network in issues that should remain between you and your partner and whatever professional help you seek. Marcus and Valerie's story became one of the most controversial, but ultimately most impactful segments in Steve Harvey's show history. It sparked intense debate about privacy in the digital age, about whether public exposure of betrayal was ever justified, and about the ethics of weaponizing private information even when that information reveals genuine wrongdoing. Many viewers initially sided with Valerie, arguing that Marcus's messages forfeited his right to privacy. But as the conversation evolved, more people began to recognize that Steve had been right to hold both of them accountable. That revenge through public humiliation was destructive regardless of what prompted it, and that children should be protected from having their parents' mistakes become public knowledge. 5 years after their first appearance, Marcus and Valerie had fully rebuilt their marriage into something stronger than it had been before the crisis. They spoke regularly at marriage retreats and church groups about their experience, helping other couples understand that the way you handle betrayal matters as much as the betrayal itself, and that public battles over private issues serve no one except those who enjoy watching other people's pain. If this story resonates with you, if you have been tempted to expose a partner's betrayal publicly, or if you have weaponized private information to seek revenge, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it, because sometimes the most important lesson we can learn is that discovering wrongdoing does not give us unlimited license to respond in destructive ways, that two wrongs do not make a right, and that the method we choose to address betrayal reveals as much about our character as the betrayal itself. Marcus and Valerie Thompson prove that public humiliation serves revenge but destroys any possibility of genuine healing, that children should always be protected from the details of their parents' mistakes, and that choosing private resolution over public spectacle is not weakness but wisdom. Remember that you can hold someone accountable without destroying them publicly, you can protect yourself without weaponizing their mistakes, and you can seek justice without becoming someone who also behaved badly.